What if the key to unimaginable wealth isn't genius, luck, or boldness, but the ability to switch off a fundamental part of what makes us human? What if the greatest financial power in the world is built on a foundation of cold, relentless logic that nullifies the chaos of emotion? Welcome to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Today, we will unravel the mind behind the friendly smile and folksy wisdom to find the frigid psychological structure that supports an empire. If you want to understand the hidden forces that move the powerful, subscribe, like this video, and prepare yourself. Today's lesson is not about how to make money, but about what you must sacrifice to accumulate it. Warren Buffett's public image is one of the most powerful psychological tools ever created in the business world. He doesn't project himself as a predatory tycoon or an inaccessible genius, but as America's wise grandfather with his simple tastes, his modest house, and his easy-to-digest metaphors. This carefully cultivated persona serves a crucial purpose: disarmament. By appearing harmless, honest, and paternal, he invites trust and neutralizes skepticism. People don't feel they are dealing with one of the richest and most calculating men on the planet, but rather receiving advice from a beloved relative, which makes his decisions and market moves much more palatable to the public and investors. This character construction is a masterclass in perception management. The ostentatious frugality, like the famous McDonald's breakfast or the fact he has lived in the same house for decades, are not just personal habits. They are elements of a brand. Every story reinforces the narrative that he is on our side. And common man who happens to be a billionaire. This creates a protective moat around his operations, making it harder to attack him or question his true intentions. He operates at a level of stratospheric financial complexity, but communicates with the simplicity of a proverb, a technique that soothes and confuses simultaneously, ensuring that few truly understand the machine behind the man. Behind this facade operates a mind that sees the world in a radically detached way. The emotional appeal of a brand, the passion of a founder, the euphoria of the market to him, all of this is just noise to be filtered out. He has trained himself to see companies not as living entities with culture and people, but as sets of future cash flows and balance sheets. This ability to completely depersonalize the object of his investment is the cornerstone of his logic. It is a form of objectivity that borders on the inhuman, allowing him to make buying and selling decisions with a clarity that would be impossible for anyone who allows sentiment to interfere. Buffett's charisma is not explosive or magnetic in the traditional sense. It is a charisma of stability. In a financial world dominated by panic and greed, he sells certainty. His unshakable calm during market crises acts as a sedative for the investing masses. He becomes the adult in the room, the safe harbor in the storm. This projection of absolute control over his own emotions inspires deep loyalty. People don't just invest in his companies. They invest in his ability to remain cold when everyone else is losing their head. A bet on his emotional negation. In the end, the Oracle of Omaha persona is both a shield and a weapon. As a shield, it protects him from the scrutiny and envy that normally accompany such wealth. As a weapon, it allows him to influence markets and behaviors with a simple phrase or an annual letter to shareholders. He understands that in the game of mass psychology, trust is the most valuable asset. By mastering the art of appearing simple, humble, and wise, he has built an empire that is not just financial, but fundamentally psychological, proving that the perception of goodness can be the most ruthless strategy of all. The core of Warren Buffett's philosophy, often simplified as value investing, is in essence a rigorous exercise in emotional negation. He identified the two greatest enemies of capital: fear and greed, and dedicated his life to building a psychological system to completely nullify their influence. This isn't just discipline. It's an active reconfiguration of the standard human response. Where most feel panic during a market crash, He has trained himself to feel opportunity. Where most feel euphoria during a bubble, he has conditioned himself to feel skepticism. This deliberate inversion of instinctual reactions is his greatest competitive advantage. This frozen logic requires extreme mental compartmentalization. It means being able to read about mass layoffs at a company and seeing only the improvement in profit margins. It means watching an industry collapse and coldly calculating which competitors will survive, rather than empathizing with the human and financial losses all around. This ability to dissociate cause from effect, the human from the numerical, is a trait often found in high-performing individuals in high-pressure fields, like surgeons or pilots. In Buffett's world, empathy is not just useless, it is a dangerous liability that can cost billions. The process to achieve this state is not natural. It requires decades of practice and conscious reinforcement. Every successful investment decision made against the market's emotional tide strengthens this neural pathway. He has turned his brain into a probability calculating machine, where emotional variables are programmed to have a value of 0. It is a form of self-hypnosis, a continuous mantra of be rational, be cold, ignore the noise. This mindset explains his aversion to investments he doesn't fully understand, like technology. In its early days, it wasn't just about technical knowledge, but a fear of entering arenas where emotion and narrative could overcome the logic of numbers. This approach creates an interesting paradox. To succeed in the market, which is the sum of millions of emotional, human decisions, he had to become as inhuman as possible. He doesn't try to predict the irrational psychology of the masses. He bets against it. He waits patiently for panic or euphoria to create absurd prices, and then acts with the certainty of a law of physics. This strategy is brilliant, but it also reveals a worldview where humanity is largely an irrational force to be exploited, not understood or shared. It is the exploitation of others' emotional fallibility. Therefore, Buffett's secret weapon is not in a complex mathematical formula, but in his ability to operate with a different psychological operating system than the rest of us. He wins the game not by playing better, but by refusing to play the same emotional game as everyone else. He places himself outside the field, in an observation tower of pure logic, and waits for the players on the field to destroy themselves with their own passions. The negation of emotion is not a side effect of his strategy. It is the strategy itself, a cold and silent weapon wielded with the precision of a master. To understand Warren Buffett's obsession with safety and his almost pathological aversion to loss, one must look to the psychological shadows of his upbringing. Born in 1930 at the height of the Great Depression, he was raised in an environment where scarcity and financial ruin were a palpable and omnipresent reality. His father, a stockbroker, experienced the crash firsthand. These formative experiences not only taught Buffett the value of money, they engraved in his psyche a deep and lasting fear of loss. The famous rule, never lose money, is not an investment tip. It is a commandment born of generational trauma. The scarcity mindset explains many of his seemingly eccentric behaviors. His frugality is not just a performance, but a genuine expression of someone who psychologically never left the Depression era. For him, waste is not just inefficient, it is morally wrong, an affront to the ever-present possibility of ruin. Every dollar saved is one more barrier between him and the abyss of poverty that haunted his parents' generation. He doesn't accumulate wealth to spend, but to build an impenetrable fortress against the chaos and uncertainty that he saw destroy so many lives. This origin also forged his legendary work ethic and his long-term mindset. In a period where survival depended on foresight and hard work, instant gratification was a non-existent luxury. He learned from an early age to delay reward, to plant seeds that would only bear fruit decades later. This superhuman patience, which allows him to hold stocks for over 50 years, is the direct opposite of the modern stock market's casino culture. It is the mindset of a farmer, not a gambler, a mindset forged by the need to survive harsh winters and uncertain harvests. The fear of loss, however, can also be a paralyzing force. In Buffett, it manifested as an extreme conservatism that caused him to miss some of the greatest waves of innovation in history, such as the rise of technology. His circle of competence is as much a prudent investment strategy as it is a psychological comfort zone. He only operates where he feels completely in control, where the cold logic of numbers cannot be subverted by disruptive narratives or technologies he cannot quantify. It is a defensive fortress designed to protect him from the unknown, which he associates with risk and loss. Thus, the billionaire we see today is in many respects the final product of the psychological scars of the past. He is a man who built a trillion-dollar empire motivated in part by the fear of returning to square one. His aversion to risk, his patience, and his frugality are not just personality traits, but highly developed defense mechanisms. He transformed the fear of loss, a paralyzing emotion for most, into the driving force behind the greatest capital accumulation machine in history, proving that the traumas of the past can be transformed into the foundations of an empire. Warren Buffett's most famous concept, the circle of competence, is presented as a principle of intellectual humility. Only invest in what you understand. However, under a dark psychology lens, it can be interpreted in a very different way. It is not just about humility, but about a deep-seated desire for absolute control. By refusing to step outside his circle, he is not just avoiding mistakes. He is avoiding uncertainty, chaos, and the possibility of being outmaneuvered by forces he cannot model or predict. It is a strategy to make the investable universe small, manageable, and above all, controllable. This control mechanism is fueled by a fundamental fear of the unknown. The world outside Buffett's circle of competence is a place of volatile narratives, disruptive technologies, and herd behaviors, all dangerously emotional variables. By limiting himself to stable, predictable industries like insurance, railroads, and consumer goods, he is deliberately choosing to play on a board where the rules rarely change. It is the manifestation of a mentality that prefers a smaller, guaranteed gain to a larger, yet uncertain one. This fear of the unknown, disguised as prudence, is what protects him, but also what limits him. Psychologically, creating such a circle is a way to reduce anxiety. The financial world is inherently chaotic and overwhelming. By defining rigid boundaries for his knowledge and operations, Buffett creates a sense of order and security amidst the chaos. He doesn't have to worry about the next big technological innovation or cultural paradigm shift because, by definition, they are outside his field of play. It's a form of self-imposed isolation that preserves his mental clarity, but also distances him from the dynamic evolution of the real world, turning him into an observer of a specific game, rather than a participant in the grand game of innovation. This need for control extends to how he manages his companies. Berkshire Hathaway is a decentralized structure, but the ultimate control of capital is firmly in his hands. He delegates operations, but never the final decision on where the money goes. This structure allows him to maintain macro control, the power to say yes or no, without getting involved in the noise of day-to-day management. It is the pinnacle of control without the burden of micromanagement, a position of almost absolute power, wielded from a calculated and detached distance, much like his investment strategy. Ultimately, the circle of competence is the ultimate expression of Buffett's personality, a relentless search for certainty in an uncertain world. It is a psychological fortress built to repel fear, emotion, and chaos. While it is undeniably effective as a financial strategy, it also reveals a rigidity and a lack of adaptability that can be seen as a weakness. He did not conquer the world. He chose a small corner of it and completely dominated it. It is a testament to his power of focus and control, but also a reminder that even the greatest empires are built as much by their walls as by their reach. If this analysis is making you see the world of investing and psychology in a new light, take a quick pause. Drop a like to help us reach more curious minds, and subscribe to The Truth, Dark Psychology. And comment below, what other powerful figure would you like to see analyzed under our lens? Now let's get back to the mind of the Oracle. One of the most subtle and effective forms of manipulation is to disguise immense complexity in deceptive simplicity. Warren Buffett is an absolute master of this art. His annual letters and famous quotes are filled with aphorisms and homespun metaphors that make investment principles seem accessible to anyone. Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. It sounds simple, almost obvious. However, this simplicity hides the superhuman psychological discipline, relentless data analysis, and access to information that are necessary to execute this strategy successfully. By promoting this narrative of simplicity, Buffett achieves two things. First, he solidifies his image as a benevolent guru, a teacher who wants to democratize financial wisdom. This generates an enormous amount of goodwill and public trust. Second, and more importantly, this simplicity masks the brutal complexity of his real operations. While the public focuses on his parables, Berkshire Hathaway is structuring multi-billion-dollar deals, leveraging tax loopholes, and wielding a market power that is light years away from the small investor he purports to advise. It's a brilliant misdirection. This technique can be seen as a form of intellectual gatekeeping. By providing rules that are simple but not easy, he places the burden of failure on the individual. If you can't be greedy when others are fearful, the problem is your lack of emotional fortitude, not the complexity of the advice. This creates a cult of personality where his successes are seen as proof of the validity of his simple rules, while the failures of his followers are attributed to their own human weakness. It is an infallible psychological framework that protects his oracle status, regardless of the results of others. Consider his famous annual meetings, nicknamed Woodstock for capitalists. They function as a grand ritual of psychological reinforcement. Thousands of followers gather to hear the same wisdom repeated year after year. The event is not about new information, but about reaffirming faith in Buffett's belief system. It is a public demonstration of power and influence, where the simplicity of his message is amplified by the crowd's adoration, creating a feedback loop that makes his words even more powerful and his image even more unassailable. Therefore, Buffett's folksy wisdom should be viewed with a healthy dose of skepticism. It's not that his advice is bad. It's that it is a dangerously incomplete version of the truth. It represents the visible tip of an iceberg of complexity, discipline, and power. The true genius lies not just in his ability to analyze a balance sheet, but in his ability to sell a simplified version of the world that benefits him immensely. He doesn't just play the money game. He plays the narrative game, and in that game, simplicity is his sharpest tool of manipulation. Warren Buffett's patience is legendary, often cited as one of his greatest virtues as an investor. He is capable of waiting years, even decades, for an investment opportunity or for a thesis to play out. From a financial standpoint, this is genius. But from a human psychology standpoint, this extreme patience raises disturbing questions. Is it a sign of superior discipline or a symptom of an emotional detachment so profound that time and waiting lose their human weight? For most people, waiting is fraught with anxiety, hope, and impatience, emotions that seem to simply not exist in his calculation. This ability to delay gratification to a superhuman level suggests a very different relationship with time and desire. Most people are driven by short-term impulses, the desire to see results, to feel progress. Buffett seems to operate on a geological timescale, where decades are treated like days. This perspective may be the result of a logic so dominant that it completely suppresses the emotional rhythms that govern human life. It is a life lived in waiting mode, where the present is constantly sacrificed for an optimized and mathematically superior future. This relentless patience can be interpreted as a form of emotional poverty. The joy of a quick victory, the thrill of the bet, the adrenaline of risk, these are all textures of the human experience that his philosophy actively rejects as dangerous and irrational. By shielding himself from the negative emotions of investing, like panic and fear, he may have also shielded himself from the positive ones. His satisfaction seems to derive not from the excitement of the journey, but from the cold, logical proof that his thesis was correct in the end. It is the pleasure of intellectual validation, not a visceral experience. Consider the impact of this mindset on human relationships. Patience in business can be a virtue, but a patience that borders on indifference can be devastating in a personal context. A mind that operates on long-term calculations and emotional detachment may struggle to connect with the urgency, passion, and spontaneity that define human relationships. The same trait that makes him a brilliant investor may, paradoxically, make him emotionally distant. Someone who observes life with the same detachment with which he analyzes a stock, patiently waiting for value to manifest out in the end. Paradox of Buffett's patience is the paradox of his own life. He has achieved a success that most people cannot even imagine, largely by suppressing the same emotional impulses that make most people's lives rich and meaningful. His discipline is undeniably a strength, but it is a strength that comes with a potential cost. The renunciation of a range of emotional experiences in exchange for logical certainty. It is a trade-off that made him a billionaire, but one that forces us to ask if the prize is worth the price of a life lived in an emotional grayscale. At the end of the analysis, a portrait emerges of a man who reached the pinnacle of the financial world by methodically isolating himself from the forces that govern the rest of humanity. Warren Buffett's frozen logic, his negation of emotion, was the foundation of his empire. But every empire has its cost, and the cost here seems to be of a profoundly psychological nature. The life of an oracle, by definition, is a lonely one. He sits atop his mountain of wealth and data, observing the patterns of human behavior below, rarely participating in the messy, beautiful chaos he so coldly analyzes. The price of becoming a machine of pure logic is a potential alienation from the human experience itself. If every decision is optimized for financial outcome, if every interaction is filtered through a risk-reward analysis, what is left for spontaneity, passion, error, and regret? The same mindset that prevents him from panicking in a market crisis might prevent him from fully surrendering to the unquantifiable joys and sorrows of life. It is the loneliness of a mind that sees the world as a mathematical problem to be solved, not as a poem to be lived. Buffett's legacy is therefore twofold and contradictory. On one hand, he leaves behind a manual on rational investing, prudence, and long-term thinking that will influence generations. He has also pledged to give away the majority of his vast fortune, an act of philanthropy on an almost unprecedented scale. However, the psychological legacy is darker. He has taught the world that to succeed, one might need to amputate a part of oneself, that emotion is a defect to be overcome, and that cold logic is the supreme path to power. This idea is both inspiring and terrifying. It inspires because it suggests we can overcome our weaknesses through discipline. It terrifies because it suggests the price of ultimate success is a form of dehumanization. In admiring Buffett's empire, we are forced to confront this choice. Are we willing to pay the emotional price to achieve our goals? Are we willing to freeze our own logic, to deny our impulses, to become the oracles of our own lives, even if it means living in a lonely fortress of our own making? In the end, the story of Warren Buffett is not just about money. It is a parable about the relationship between the mind and the heart, between logic and emotion. He is living proof of the power of a detached mind and the wealth it can generate. But his story also serves as a silent warning. A warning about what can be lost when the numbers on a spreadsheet become more real than the beats of a human heart. Buffett's empire is vast and enduring, but it is an empire built in the silence of emotion, a legacy of logic as brilliant and as cold as a diamond. The human mind is the ultimate battlefield where logic and emotion wage an eternal war. Figures like Warren Buffett show us what can be built when one side achieves total victory. Here at The Truth, Dark Psychology, we believe that the greatest empires and the deepest tragedies are built both in the mind and in the market. If you want to continue unraveling the psychology of the powerful, don't forget to subscribe. Hit the bell to never miss an analysis. Leave your comment with your thoughts and suggestions for future videos. What do you think? Is Buffett's logic a virtue to be emulated or a warning to be heeded? The truth, as always, is complex and dark. Until next time.